A what?
My mom worked at a Soft Surroundings for a while, which is like a nice like home decor store, for suburban, and they had this whole line of it's like plushy velvet pumpkins, but with an actual pumpkin stem, so it's year-round pumpkins.
Yeah, no, that definitely looks like something that would come from a suburban homes store.
I got like 12 of them in this room.
Oh, that's
Mom
so cute. I actually last year was in Target and saw a pumpkin like that. Because Target does a good job with like their fall stuff, but they had these.
They do a good job.
They do a good job. They also do a good job with like their seasonal snacks. Like they have really good autumn flavors and like snacks. But
I agree.
I saw in their like home decor, their autumn home decor, they had like a plushy pumpkin like that. Pretty much the exact same thing, except the pumpkin was like a very light pink, almost flesh tone. Oh. And then the stem of the pumpkin was like it was short and it was like a slightly darker like flesh tone, and so it 100% looked like a boob.
No.
I was like, how did this either was very intentional, by someone in the marketing for that object, and they were just like, it's going out, it's going to be hilarious, or someone just missed it completely. One of the
someone
two.
Really dropped the ball with that,
because it looked 100% like a boob.
Like a boob.
Look out, something is going to get you tonight. Let's talk about the thing that's going to get you tonight. Welcome to the Happy Harvest Horror Show.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Corrie.
And I'm Brian, and this is the Happy Harvest Horror Show. Let's start over.
Perfect. That was amazing. That was so good. The enthusiasm, unparalleled, my friend.
Ready to go.
Oh my God, that was great. Happy Harvest Horror Show. We're excited to be here.
Today, too excited. This is the Happy Harvest Horror Show, where we get together and talk about all things spooky and creepy and all a little kooky. And today we, as always, have a very fun topic. But before that, Corrie, it's been a few weeks since we've actually recorded an episode.
I know.
That's why I had so much enthusiasm. I was like, oh yeah, I'm Brian.
I am Brian.
Feeling good. It's been a few weeks, Corrie. How spooky, I guess, has your time been? Mid-summer?
So, actually really spooky, but then, in prepping for this episode, I couldn't remember all the things, but I know there's been a lot of things. I know there has, but, I couldn't remember because it's just been a while since we recorded. But there is one that I remember very well. So I'll just, focus on that one.
Yeah, let's do it.
I watched a movie on Netflix called The Invitation. Have you seen this? Have you heard of this?
Is this the dinner party one?
Yes.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good with an ending that is just mwah.
Oh, I know. And it's so my jam. It's cult-based horror pretty much. I was like, wow.
It's a fantastic movie.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I was really, really just pleasantly surprised. Because I don't know, I think I just there have been a handful of times recently where I've been really stoked on a concept for a movie and it's kind of let me down. And this one I was
nails
just
that landing,
Yeah, I was like, this is it. And as a self-proclaimed cult expert, it's just very on the nose. I think it really embodies how how cult-like thinking preys on people, how it takes a hold of people, and how it can very easily lend itself to tragedy in a very like, you know, obviously it's a horror movie, so it's done in a very like the tragedy is big. The tragedy is big, but I liked it because at the end it's like that's not crazy to think that something like that could happen. And I love that it's set in LA. I love that it's set in LA because LA just has such weird culty vibes. So
Oh yeah, all the time.
all the time.
And
all
the
the
hills
time.
of LA, which lend to like, I won't spoil for anyone who hasn't seen it, but just leads to like one of the most like harrowing shots, you know, that was like
it was
in
so good.
recent memory. What a great movie. Yeah, big fan.
Yeah,
Glad you watched it.
and I like to like with it being in LA, I think it's really easy for anyone who has a, you know, vested interest in cults to really quickly chart the connection to like the Manson murders, and then you know, like we're like, and then we're seeing this 21st century development of large scale cults that are able to kind of reach out because of the internet, and how they really do grasp large amounts of people. And yeah, once again, don't want to ruin anything, but I think the ending really shines a light on that, on like how big of a grasp these cults can have. And yeah, I thought it was, I mean, like in certain ways, it was like a slasher movie.
It was, yeah.
It was like, and I think the melding of the cult thinking and the approach to that, and then to be able to really seamlessly weave in a slasher film, and then to come out the other side and it still all makes sense narratively. I was really impressed. I was really happy with it. I was like, this is a good movie. This is a very good movie.
Yeah, it's a solid movie. It's on Netflix too. Yeah, so it's free. You already have it.
The Invitation, y'all. Big recommend. Big recommend. That was a big one. Like I said, there was other stuff and I just can't remember it. I started watching, but I'm not all the way through Fear Street.
The first one or part two?
First one.
Okay.
And I am really enjoying it for a lot of reasons. And I have one huge criticism.
Let's hear
it's
it.
Just me being super annoying.
Let's hear it.
At the very beginning. So Fear Street number 1, 1994 says it right there. It's 1994. That's the time. That's where we are. At the very beginning. I remember the character's name, but the dude is messaging on AOL Instant Messenger. AIM did not exist yet. It did not exist until 1998, and it's AIM because it has the AOL Instant Messenger sound. It has the aesthetic, and I was like, "Don't you try and play me like that." I was alive.
Yeah,
it did not exist in 1994.
I saw people go even deeper. They were like, the font that they're using did not exist in that.
You can't fuck with us like that. You cannot. We were there for it. We were there for when AIM became a thing. Do not try and tell me that shit was around when I was 5 years old, because it
Which
was
is not. Like we're talking about just such silly stuff. But Fear Street in 1994, it hit so many other like slam dunk. Home run nostalgia moments that bits like that do kind of stand out, that you're like,
exactly. I think that's why it's frustrating. It's because like they're not doing like a hack job. Like they're really going into like, we want to make this the time frame. And so if you're setting out to do that, like I am going to be watching you. Like I am going to make sure you get it right. Like that is something I've realized with myself as I get older. And I actually think about this a lot. I wonder if there are older generations, like people who are older than me, that like maybe feel this way about movies from the 80s, right? Like, or the maybe. 70s, because like I wasn't alive for that stuff. So it all is the same to me, right?
Yeah.
And like sometimes I can kind of pick out things like that just from the fact that like I'm a historian. So I spend a lot of time thinking about like the different visual aesthetics of history,
Mhm.
but like still it kind of all blends together to me. But like once I get into a time when I was a very conscious human being, like, end of the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Like I know what that looked
I'm an
like and what
expert
that,
in that. Yeah.
yeah, I experienced that. Like, you are not going to get shit past me. Like, I am going to like really nitpick. So I don't know if that's just because I'm at an age now where I can do that, because we're at a time where period pieces are being made about times when we were alive.
Isn't that, but oh man, you're so right. That period piece is about, oh my God.
I know.
Age
I
10
know.
years, you saying that, like.
And it's wild, but like from my perspective, I'm like, I want it to be flawless. And so yeah, it also makes me wonder though, are movies that are set in the 70s, like, are people who were alive in the 70s like picking them apart and being
Maybe.
like, not this didn't exist yet.
That didn't
like
happen.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah. I also wonder that the access to props in the 70s was probably a lot easier to get than now. Than nowadays, making things in the 70s maybe it's a bit harder. You need to actually be a historian at this point instead of just ask your aunt, or someone like.
Right. That reminds me of a really great tweet I saw recently that was like, it showed a picture of basically, our current 21st century conception of like the 80s aesthetic.
Yeah.
And it was like a girl, and she's wearing like day glow and like, the knee highs and like that whole look that pretty much everyone has done at like Halloween at some point, the kind of day glow exercise 80s vibe, side ponytail, right? And that has become kind of what we are like, that's the 80s, right? Like, we have decided that was the 80s, and that's not entirely false. Like, day glow was a thing, like leg warmers, and
wasn't just that though.
Yeah. And so there was, in this tweet, there was a picture of that, like this kind of costume 80s look. Right. It was like what everyone like thinks the 80s were. And then there was a picture that was like what the 80s actually were. And it's so good. It's just a picture of this like yellow brown kind of like glass ashtray at a McDonald's.
Yeah.
Like, and then someone was like, it was, and then the caption was like, I am old enough to remember how fucking brown the 80s were. And I was like, yeah, like, I mean,
everything was brown.
I was born at the very tail end of the 80s, but like, yeah, like that, I remember early 90s, and like that makes sense to me. It's like it was brown, like it was.
Yeah,
like
shaggy carpets, you had brown wainscoting walls, you had brown, like everything was brown. You had brown station wagons,
and people were smoking cigarettes at McDonald's, and that was like.
And that was the 80s.
So like the 80s were actually like very hazy and brown in a lot of ways, but we have this conception of them as bright colors and like, so it's interesting how we decide to repackage the way a decade looked.
Yeah.
And I think Fear Street is a really fun way to just watch that play out.
I agree. Fear Street was one of the things I was going to talk about too, because I've seen both the first two parts. Third part coming out this weekend, so we haven't seen it yet. I'm so excited. I think it's so good though. I think it's so fun. I think that's what I want to hone in on, because there's you can talk about things here and there, but at the heart of it, it's just a fun slasher movie. That like.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I just love the I love the concept.
Mm-hmm.
I love the concept of like I said, I'm only on part 1, and I'll finish it tonight. But like from the very beginning, yeah, it's like slasher, very, very much inspired. Like it's Scream, right? It's inspired
very Scream, yeah.
And that makes sense because that was the heart of the 90s slasher, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's taking you on this really fun horror tour.
Mm-hmm.
And making the horror, central to what was the heart of horror of that time. And like,
everyone wanted to be
I
Scream then. Yeah.
Yeah. The concept is super fun. Very, very, very smart.
And it's all based on like young adult books too, which I am also a huge fan of. That I never read the Fear Street books. I read Goosebumps growing up, but I never read Fear Street. But I know that they're just like the next step up from Goosebumps from R.L. Stine, that book series. And I love that then in the movie 3-part Netflix trilogy, they were talking about Fear Street. They're like, yeah, these are not going to be young adult. We're going hard R, these like, which I love, because it's like Goosebumps will always be spooky kid, world, but I feel like I don't know. I love that it's catering to an audience that grew up with Fear Street, and the audience that loved Fear Street are now all adults, and they probably all remember it a lot more gnarly than it probably was. And so like making it this hard R slasher, that's so fun. That's another thing I want to.
And that's smart. Like, I've had this conversation before too. Like, if you want to do anything that is like lineage or a reboot and we live in the land of reboots right now. We bring them up all the time. Yeah. I think for them to succeed, you always have to be catering to the audience of the original. Like, you have to, and that doesn't mean that people outside of that audience won't enjoy it, but I think for them to be really successful, you have to be thinking, how old is the audience that was the original of this thing? How old are they now? And what would they like to see now? And when people do that in creating a reboot, that's when you get something really good, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's really good. I think it's super fun. Part 2 is just like that. I mean, like part 1's 90s, part 2 is 78. So it's a very Friday the 13th camp horror, slasher. But it was getting at a second ago is that like we live in a, horror has never been hotter in our lifetime, that like right now it's in the zeitgeist. It's being taken seriously, and like Oscars are nominating it now. Things like Lovecraft Country just got 18 nominations for the
Emmys.
Fuck yeah, like it's but these are all instances of like A24 has created the serious horror.
Yes, A24. Like A24 is actually like,
they've created, and I to know, not talking down A24 because I love the fucking Witch. I love, Lighthouse. I love most of the A24.
I know, like a lot of my favorites are A24 for sure.
But also, I don't think that should be all it is.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe for a while in its resurgence, we've been stuck in like it has to be really mumbles, quiet, dark, really gripping. And when I remember earlier this year in the pandemic, when I saw the drive-in Freaky, the slasher, like a Freaky Friday with Vince Vaughn, and he switches like places, I was like, this is what I want. I want more fun. Just like this bonkers. It doesn't like great soundtrack. Just go like.
No, there always needs to be room for camp. Like camp is joy. Like camp is good. And I mean that, beyond horror, but definitely in the horror realm as well. Camp is good.
And I think we're finally getting there, that like we're now embracing that part, that like that have existed. We've had, homage movies the last few years, of course. And like, I don't know, but I'm excited that now this is being made too. And I bet this, just like Scream influenced a lot of people, I bet now this is going to influence people down the line.
Totally. No, I completely agree. Like like I said, like a lot of my favorites are I like the serious, heavy, quiet, dark folk horror. Of
course.
It speaks to me on an incredibly deep level, but I don't know. I feel like my instinct is to go astrology here because like I'm a Scorpio sun, so I like the deep, heavy shit. But I'm a Leo rising, so I fucking love camp. like I want to have fun too,
Yeah.
Like I want to party, and like the camp approach to horror. It's just important because part of what makes horror healing sometimes is when you can look at it in that playful just absurd, campy way.
When you can
And so-
embrace, when you kind of you can hug what you're afraid of,
Yeah,
in a little weird way.
totally.
Yeah, but yeah. So anyway, I think Fear Street is doing that right now. It's very fun.
Yeah.
It's and gnarly too. And I say not fun. When I say fun, I don't mean this is a cute movie. I mean there's kills
straight out the gate on the first one on 1994. Like that first scene that's some heavy slasher action. Like
I don't know. You haven't. I won't spoil it because you said you haven't finished it. But there's a kill later in the movie towards the end that is an all timer. That
oh wow,
slasher fan Brian over here blushed a bit. Oh my god, you can't believe you did that. So anyone who hasn't seen Fear Street, that's my hype up for you. So yeah, I mean this is welcome to the Happy Harvest Horror Show where we talk about Fear Street and how great it is.
I mean once it cycles through. Do you know how many there are even supposed to be? Like how many parts are supposed to be?
There's 3. This
Just
Friday
3?
is the last part. Yeah.
Okay.
Trilogy.
Hopefully
they'll make more. I mean, there's plenty of Fear Street books, right? And I'm pretty sure this is.
So is the next one going to be like from the 50s? Is that
first one is 1994. Part 2 is 1978. Part 3 is 1666. Takes place at the Puritan village where it all started with the witch. Yeah.
Shut up. I'm super excited about that. Also, now I'm like, I wish there was more though, because I feel like doing 50s, 40s, classic black and white horror could have been super cool,
Hopefully they do. Hopefully they do it more.
Yeah. Like Vincent Price energy.
Just write to your local Netflix and say more, please. More Ovaltine, please.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm already excited to finish after we're done recording this episode. But we should probably get
into the topic of the episode. I had a good spooky week. It was a lot of this. I saw some other movies, but whatever. We love horror. Let's get into it.
Whatever. It's fine. Today we are talking about a really fun topic that interestingly is just like a topic that I don't know. I didn't really know much about this world. It's not a world I've spent a lot of time in, but it's been fun kind of diving into. But before we do that, shout out to our supporters who are also book club members because we're doing Happy Harvest Horror Show Book Club,
which is next week on July
21st. 21st.
Yeah,
and
21st.
For our first month of book club, we read A Head Full of Ghosts. I'm obsessed with it personally. I loved this book, but we're doing for our supporters in our Happy Harvest Horror Show community. We're doing a little monthly book club where we pick a book every month, we read it, and then at the end of the month we'll do a Zoom and we're all gonna hang out and talk. The Zoom for this month will be July 21st, and anyone who is a supporter can receive that link. If you would like to join the book club, become a Happy Harvest Horror Show supporter at any level, as low as 99 cents a month. Help support us making this content. And then, just shoot us an email and be like, sign me up for the book club and we'll get you on the list. And we're super excited. We have a really nice crew of people that are a part of it already this first month. So
we got a cool group.
Brian, do you want to give shout outs to our...
Yeah, get shout outs to some new members too. So our full list of now supporters is Jenny, Julia, Whitney, Jody, Keith, Erica, Jody, Wendy, Morgan, Michelle, Jennifer, Jody, and Aaron. Thank you all so much. Man, that was a list. That's exciting.
I know that is exciting. We're
welcome
so happy
all. Thank
that
you all
guys
so
are
much
here.
for the support. Can't wait for the book club, and we'll announce after next week what the next book is for next month. Exciting. Should be fun. This is exciting. Yeah.
And so if you want to support our wonderful crew of people, head over to anchor.fm/HHHS/support. There's options there for you. You can throw all your money at us if you want. We will not.
Or just 99 cents. And
99 cents or all of it. Whatever feels good to you.
There is an option.
I want to give all my money. Happy Harvest Horror Show. But yeah, check it out. And yeah, let's take a quick break and then we're gonna come back. And today we are talking about the classic horror host, the horror TV hosts. Like, it's a whole thing, you guys.
So we're gonna get into it in just a minute.
We've returned. Happy Harvest Horror Show. And tonight we're talking about horror hosts.
Yeah, late night TV horror hosts. Those really fun local news station hosts that would introduce some spooky B movies.
Yeah, it's such a so when you propose this topic, because it's not something I have spent a lot of time watching or
right.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of back knowledge on horror hosts, but my instinct, the first thing I thought of, there were two things. Crypt Keeper, Tales from the Crypt, 100%. Like, puppet corpse horror host. Love it. So that popped into my head. And then the second thing was Bill Hader as Vincent Price on Saturday Night Live.
Introducing it.
And I was like, yeah, I think that's what a horror host is.
Yeah, well, it's kind of fun looking into it because it started as a collection, a package of pre-1948 classic horror movies from Universal Studios that was released for television syndication, marketed as shock feeder. So like there's all these movies that are now ready to, just old movies, and we're going to package them all. And it was encouraged that you would have some sort of host introduce them. And so local TV stations would often just have their own costumed personality. It's largely accepted that the first host that really kind of gave the blueprint for how to do it was Vampira. And she was rad. She was cool.
Yeah. Like just like her whole vibe. I'm a big fan. And the fact that it was like the 1950s, like I don't know, everything about that. I'm just like, this is amazing. Like the fact that this existed in the 1950s is amazing to me.
Oh yeah, totally. And it got reinvigorated interest in all these movies too, because like television was now like accessible form, and like we have all these movies that we can now release on TV, and it was like a fun event every night. Vampira, fucking rad though. She was.
I think like my instinct. Obviously, I didn't exist in the 50s. I wasn't alive. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what the 50s were like. If you were alive in the 50s, please write in and tell us. But I don't know. But I just think 1950s, I just think like Leave It to Beaver, right? Like, and so the idea that large amounts of people were excited by this horror host who really leaned into this look very similar to Morticia Addams and was talking about horror films, and that was like a somewhat mainstream thing, like like kind of niche but like kind of mainstream, that just like I don't know, it kind of like messes with my concept of what late night TV and the average American home in the 1950s was like.
Yeah, well, I think for families, I bet there's a lot of kids that, gather around late at night, and it was, this is cool. I'm like this late night, and it's being presented by a very spooky, like you character that you take as real, when many times it was just the local cameraman that like, or the local weatherman that just like threw on a wig or something. But I love that even too. Like
the extent to which the public television horror host was a thing for decades really kind of blows my mind. Like it really is. It's wild. Like it was a thing. And from just like my research, I feel like it was like a very Midwest thing.
It's big in Chicago.
big in Chicago. There was another big one I found that was out of Kansas City. And yeah, I don't know, just this like this concept of this campy personality showing these very like kind of lower tier horror movies on public access television is just
right.
It's super interesting.
Well, it was super popular. Ratings skyrocketed thanks to a lot of this. It was between in some markets it would raise by 300%, and some by 1,500%, thanks to things like shock theater. And because it was so successful, they eventually had a follow-up Creature feature, which was then 60s films that included a lot of science fiction, a lot of monster movies, a lot of British horror movies, and Night of the Living Dead uncut, because we know that he didn't have the rights. So
show that everywhere all the time.
Everywhere all the time. It can be in any movie you want. It's public domain.
I could just splice it into this video right now. Welcome to Night of the Living Dead, everybody.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
The video is 4 hours because we just put Night of the Living Dead right here, and then we'll pick it up right here at the end too.
Be amazing.
Oh man. Yeah, I also love that the second, before Creature feature, the second package of films released for syndication was called Son of Shock. So we had Shock Theater, and then Son of Shock. So even like the package itself was like a fun, like spooky, lineage. This also, I mean, because of this, we're focusing on the host, but this gave an entire generation. This likely kept Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy, the classic monsters in the cultural, awareness. Instead of them being like, museum pieces, we'd look back. This probably kept horror, at least the framework that we understand it today, alive.
Totally. Like, yeah, that's like I said, I didn't grow up with horror hosts aside from like I said, Crypt Keeper is like the one that I relate to. But in doing this research, I'm just like, this was like a continuous thing for decades that I think really kept the kind of American interest in horror very much alive, very much like continuous, and yeah, just thinking of the way in which it's presented, the fact that we're talking like public access television, like so many people that probably would never have had an interest in horror probably got like enraptured by it. And
yeah, totally. I know I would have been. I mean, I sadly didn't grow up local news. We didn't tune in for that. I mean, 90s, this was largely kind of dying out.
Mm-hmm.
I feel
like the 80s was like the last big heyday for the television horror host, because there was like a lot of them in the 80s.
Totally. And then they also, I mean, they're still around. There's still some around today. We'll talk about the ones that are still hanging on, and they're rad. But I remember one guy that we'll talk about a little more later was Joe Bob Briggs, and he was on Monster Vision on TNT. So it wasn't even a cable access, like a local station. It was TNT. And I just remember, late at night being at my dad's house or whatever and tuning in, and I'm like, what is this? What is this world that like
what is happening?
What is happening? Yeah, really, right? Because you're a kid in your early 90s, and you got your Disney-fied movies, and then you got this, what is this movie, and who is this personality that loves it? Yeah,
this is why I'm going to keep kind of coming back to the Crypt Keeper. I feel like the Crypt Keeper was that for me, because that was like Tales from the Crypt was not a children's show. And I 100% watched it as a child. Like, and I think I definitely had a big, like, what is this?
What
like,
is this?
What the fuck is happening? And so like, to me, in my just life experience, Crypt Keeper continued that lineage in a very important way.
Sure.
But just kind of took on a new like I said, it's a puppet corpse now. It's no longer like a person on public access television.
Right. And it's all for original, Tales from the Crypt was all original stories too that he was introducing. So it wasn't even like it was sprucing up old content and re-releasing it in a fun way. It was like, now the host is so ingrained in our, horror framework that of course we'll have a puppet introduce it. And of course it'll be the parents of the Crypt Keeper. Do you remember what they were? The Crypt Keeper. That's him. Is fictional ghoul.
Fictional ghoul.
Not to be confused with the real ghouls of our character and origin. Here we go. It is revealed that the Crypt Keeper's parents are Enoch, a carnival sideshow freak with 2 faces, and a 2,000-year-old mummy.
Yeah.
So
that tracks.
But this is like, of course, this is the puppet. This is who we're.
So Crypt Keeper is my horror host, like, of my reality, and that makes perfect sense because like I grew up in the golden age of like Muppets, right. And Muppets mean, this, Muppets mean everything to me. I'm obsessed with Muppets. Literally
everything to you.
Yes. they really do. But, Muppets, Jim Henson, like, mean everything to me. And it just feels right that our horror host would be a fictional ghoul puppet.
He's our hero. We didn't deserve him, but we got him.
I know, right? And we were lucky enough. We went to Salem and we went to a panel where we got to see. I can't think
the voice
of
of the Crypt Keeper.
Yeah, the dude who voiced the Crypt Keeper, and he was really fun. He was really fun. Really
cool.
Yeah, it was
really
a fun
cool. Panel too. They went through like the top 20 Tales from the Crypt moments. Whatever,
That show is banger, you guys. Tales from the Crypt is banger. It's such a good show. It is
so good, and it is a criminal that we got HBO Max, and it's all HBO Go, HBO, all this. And Tales from the Crypt is this neglected gold mine. They have seasons and seasons of just gold, and they are not, re-releasing. I bet it's just a rights issue that is a nightmare, but like
terrible.
If you want to watch
and
it,
I remember when we went to that panel, I wish I could remember his name. The dude who played the Crypt Keeper talked about how like that was at like when HBO was really becoming a thing, and how like Tales from the Crypt was actually like big in HBO being HBO.
Oh, totally. And it was super formative for a lot of people's careers. We're getting into the weeds here of Tales from the Crypt, but like,
we need to do a future Tales from the Crypt episode. Like,
we'll talk about it there.
Yeah, we'll talk about it more later.
Back to horror hosts that Tales from the Crypt. Yeah.
I just wanted to give love to Crypt Keeper because that's my horror host. Like gonna tell my kids this was the horror host like situation. But yes, let's back it up. Let's go back to Vampira. Yeah, and like because that story is fascinating.
It is. Real name Mela Nurmi. Is that how you would pronounce that?
I think it was Mila Nurmi. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm so sorry that I don't have the correct.
I'm so sorry.
So sorry. I'm such a dummy. Mila, the idea was formed partly inspired by Morticia Addams.
Interestingly, inspired by Morticia Addams, but inspired by the comic, right? Because this is before the show even existed.
Before we had any of that, 60s. Yeah. So it
was inspired by the comic by Charles Addams, which we talked about on our Addams Family episode. Inspired by the comic, but the comic, they didn't have names. So she was Morticia Addams before Morticia Adams. Is that crazy?
Wow, right? And she also, not even just that, she was also mixed that with the evil queen from Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, which also, to my knowledge, didn't have a name either, But so we got two spooky ladies we're gonna meld him into a horror host of just like a super, a long black dress. She would introduce herself by basically, coming towards the camera in a darkened face, and the fog's coming through, and then she would scream in the camera, and then she would laugh, and it would like a whole, on edge thing, and it was a whole persona.
The images, just like even like the stills from Vampira, are gold, like because black and white 50s, right. And her look is perfect. And you have like the candelabras.
She's on the Victorian couch.
Yeah,
it's the fog going through. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It's wonderful. But it only ran for a year, the Vampira show, which was the first kind of example of, doing the shock theater and introducing the movies. And she also kind of introduced the mocking of the B movies too. Mm-hmm. When she would introduce them, she would make fun of them while also making like ghoulish puns and like talking, I'm all about the puns. We'll get into the horror host, but I'm all about the puns.
The puns are huge for the horror host. And also, I think we need to give attention to the fact that, like, yes, that was part of the horror host kind of template, was that you're kind of making fun of these, like, B-level horror movies, but, like, it's done in a very playful way. Yeah. And also, without these horror hosts, these movies would have disappeared. A lot of them would have disappeared.
Isn't that weird to think that, like, by making fun of them, it almost gives people permission to enjoy them?
Yes, 100. That is kind of the beauty in this whole setup. It's like, like it gives a new life to movies that would have just disappeared, and then they can continue on. And then, I totally agree. I find that super fascinating about the horror host concept. Like, my instinct here is like Twilight, right? Like, it makes sense to me to think of the cycle of Twilight, super huge. We all, like us teens, when Twilight hit, it was big. And then we went through a phase where it was like, I'm a hipster, Twilight's dumb, like I'm pushing, like fuck Twilight, like making fun of Twilight. And then it's like, now we're back around,
coming back.
Like, Twilight. Yeah. And it's like we let it live on by going through these cycles. And I think it's a really lovely representation of what was going on with these horror hosts.
100%. Yeah, I think we're definitely to the point now too where we can now, it's okay to like things, like we're finally back, like we're kind of shedding this thank you part of me that had to put on this role to make fun of it, to like it. You served your purpose. Like in therapy, I say thank you and I let you go. Or I don't need you now. Thank you. Now I can fully just,
I love that. I love the idea of playfully making fun of a film as a form of appreciation. I think that's actually very beautiful. Like, like you're kind of thanking it in a way, right? Like,
right.
And I think that's embodied by these like horror hosts in a certain way, because without these movies, they don't exist,
That's real. And they kept alive too. Now we're still talking about them,
Right.
Thank you.
Cycles, baby. Cycles. Like
cycles. But sadly, she only did it for a year. Later in life, they tried to bring back her show, and she was going to be an executive producer on it, but she didn't agree with who was going to replace her. They did not consult her who was going to cast in the role of Vampira, who turned out to be Elvira.
Scandal.
And so Elvira couldn't use the name Vampira, so she made the name Elvira, which Nermi took Elvira to court because you stole my character, and the court ruled that, like, just because it looks like you doesn't mean it's actually like that. It's not the exact representation, which is also kind of ironic because Vampira was also based on other characters too. I would agree with that ruling. I don't think Elvira and Vampira are the same thing. Like, I think they have different energies. They visually do look similar in a lot of ways, but I don't get the same vibe from them. So it's like, and that's a hard
thing to determine, to what extent is it copying,
Sure.
a previous character. I do, before we move on to Elvira, though, I want to mention about Vampira that it's basically been proven that the depiction of Maleficent in the film Sleeping Beauty, in the 1959 film, was based on Vampira.
She was the model for it. Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's cool, right?
That's so cool. So
That
it's she was both Morticia Addams before Morticia Addams, and she was the model for Maleficent. Like, are you kidding me?
And she got the idea also partly from another Disney princess movie with Snow White and the Evil Queen. So it just like, we love art, just feeding on itself.
I know, it's
always
beautiful.
hungry dragon.
It makes me so fucking excited. Like, I love it. I love these interconnections. Yeah, that's so baller. That's so badass.
That's so cool. Also, fun tidbit before we move on. I talked about the drama with Elvira, but she had a child with Orson Welles. Did you know?
Hey.
But that was when he was married to Rita Hayworth, so the child was given up for adoption. I don't know what happened to the child.
Yeah, do we know the child?
If the child is in our audience.
Yeah, are you out there?
Are you out there?
Like, has anything? Damn, that's wild. That's
Isn't
drama.
Yeah, that's juicy gossip on the Wikipedia, from many years ago.
Right.
That was Vampira. We also got Elvira. Cassandra Peterson is the actress behind the persona.
Who also, when we were in Salem,
she was there too
for that panel with the dude who voiced the Crypt Keeper. We ended up having to wait quite a while because in the exact same building, like we literally walked right past it, Cassandra Peterson, Elvira, was doing autographs and the line was insane.
Not so line. We thought the line was going to what we were going to and found out we were in the wrong line.
Yeah.
Happily, we were in the wrong line because that line was nutso. But also we were like, I kind of want to be in this line.
Yeah, the line was insane. And so the panel had to wait because they were like, they knew a lot of people who bought tickets for the panel
were still
waiting in line to get Elvira's autograph. So yeah, just layers here. Inception.
Layers on layers on layers.
That all happened in a hotel in Salem. Like,
which makes sense, like
yeah, totally does.
It sounds about right. What's your connection to Elvira? Do you have one?
So I when we were in Salem, like I knew who she was. Like I knew what the big deal was, but like once again, I haven't really like watched her or like watched her shows or anything, but like I knew who Elvira was. In doing research and kind of getting more into it, I understood the lineage from Vampira to Elvira, and I was like, okay, so this is more of like a modern day take. And then I watched some of her first show, the movie Macabre, which the first season's on Peacock. So if you want some real classic horror host energy, you can go to Peacock and watch the first season. And I was watching some of it, and my instant take was just like spooky bimbo energy, which is a big energy. Like right now the bimbo is back. Like bimbo energy is big right now. So I was like, this is powerful. Powerful. She's definitely playing it, as we said, has a similar look to Vampira. And is doing a similar thing. She's playing these old horror films and kind of making fun of them, making puns. But there's definitely an element, I mean, like just from a physical standpoint, like her boobs are very like out there and like it's very
The cleavage is a big part of the costume.
Yeah, for real. It's very intentional. It's like that's part of the look. And her vibe is kind of bimbo-y, right? Is kind of like
Very much, yeah.
Making these silly jokes and like, which I think is such a fun duality, like the spooky heaviness of horror meets the campy bimbo silly energy. Like,
exactly.
It makes sense to me that it works. Like it's very smart.
Yeah. All the innuendos, all the, it's very much the puns and the innuendos kind of go hand in hand. There was I went back and rewatched Mistress of the Night. Watched for the first time. I've actually never seen it. It was the first of her 2 movies, and I think I got a fuller knowledge of who she was from that, and the kind of the very like almost I don't know, not depreciating. What's I guess
there is a self-deprecation about her.
Yeah, you think so?
Yeah, I do think so. But like an intentional one. Like,
right.
It's not. It's like it works. It's like in a playful enough way that it's not like it's campy. It's campy. Like
yeah, it's very campy. It's also a lot. Like it is. Whereas I feel like it is the opposite end of the Elvira and Vampira, right? They're opposite ends of this where you can take that character. Whereas Vampira was very,
which makes sense because Movie Macabre came out or ran 1981 to 1988, right?
Yes.
So think about the time frame. Think about America in the 80s. Like her character fits the time frame that she existed in, which means it's intentional, which means it's very smart, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas Vampira was doing something
a little more subdued, not as
subdued.
Yeah.
I agree. But like the 80s were not about subdued. Like that is not what the 80s were about. I mean, ultimately, like mad respect. I think it's brilliant. I think she's created a really brilliant career for herself.
Hell yeah, she has, and it's still going. I mean, like
I know, like she's doing amazing. I'm like, fucking get it, girl. That's incredible.
She
I
still
love
looks
it.
amazing too. Like
I know.
That character is still, so.
Yeah, they did in 2014, they did a 13 Nights of Elvira where they brought back the original Movie Macabre format. And they did like a 13 Nights with her. And it's not currently on Hulu, but like I have to say Hulu is like so good about Halloween. Like Hulu, there is someone that is high up at Hulu that really fucking cares about Halloween.
Hulu's low key like great finds for horror too. They 100%. Got that IFC Midnight locked. They got a lot of indie, a lot of lower budget movies that are great. Have made it to Hulu recently. And I'm don't sleep on Hulu with horror.
Not at all. Yeah, like exactly. I feel like I end up seeing some really good horror on Hulu. I feel like they have really good series. Like before we were recording, we were talking about Castle Rock. Like I think Castle Rock's brilliant.
And then they canceled it like a bunch of cowards.
But a bunch of cowards. But then they also do every year they do Huluween. And I love Huluween because they just create this really like it's a whole page just dedicated to like Halloween stuff. And they even like set up the Halloween episodes of like sitcoms and it's so
great.
Good.
Yeah,
someone at Hulu really cares about Halloween and I appreciate it.
And I love them.
But yeah, so they did 13 Nights of Elvira back in 2014. But you can watch it on Prime apparently. So I don't know, maybe check that out. But all that to say, Elvira, Sandra Peterson has created a really cool little niche for herself.
Yes, very
very well loved in the horror circuit, and is still doing it. Is still making shit, and I think it's really baller.
Yeah, totally. Before we get too much into the present, also from these film hosts, these horror hosts of late night, also spurned, because we now have renewed interest in classic monsters, the magazine Famous Monsters of Filmland, which was a big thing. It started in 58. The magazine would give like exposés, a lot of stories, a lot of pictures, of classic monsters. It was like a great like find, you can go in and like keep it going, keep this interest going. And thanks to this magazine, we now, we have magazines like Fangoria, we've got Uruk Morgue, it's all thanks to this, which is all thanks to the horror host, shock theater craze. So it's cool just marking lineages where they are. Like the Fangoria magazine that I got sitting right here is largely thanks to down the line horror hosts. So
yeah,
thank you.
thank you. So we have Vampira, the original, Elvira, also huge, very much connected to Vampira, but then we have offshoots too. We got to talk about Svengoolie.
Oh yeah, totally.
So Chicago based. This is what I was saying about like Midwest before. I feel like there's a lot of horror hosts that came out of the Midwest, like
because they get it.
Yeah. We're just here and like hanging out in the winter. It makes sense to me that like these horror hosts were like showing up on like Midwest public television,
And we ate it up.
Svengoolie was a horror show icon in Chicago, so
still is too.
Yeah, he's still going for it.
Well, when we're doing research, I watched. I can't remember what the movie was. It was some sea creature movie, but it was last weekend I was watching, and I just watched like an hour of him, and I'm like, this is rad. I love it. He's if you haven't seen Svengoolie, highly recommend just looking him up. He's still on MeTV. You can look up things online, past recordings and whatnot. And he's got this face paint. He has this vaudeville act where cameramen throw rubber chickens at him. And he is just like a gold mine of information on the, obscure movie that they're showing, which I so appreciate, like going back to an earlier conversation about, we went through the mocking phase and now we're in the appreciation phase. And that's what I really love. And so I love watching a host that's like, yeah, we're talking about this 1948, black and white movie that's, about this creature, but I'm going to tell you so much about, how it was made. And I'm like eating it up, So that's what I really appreciate about him. I love that he seems so jazzed and interested in it. So much so that the Rondo Horror Awards, he's been voted favorite horror host multiple times. So we're not alone. A lot of people like him.
Yeah, he seems very playful. He seems like a lot of fun.
And the current one is the successor. The original Svengoolie was in the late 70s. And the current one, Rich Cause is his name. And he took over in April 2011. And he's killing it.
Still going for it. Still making it happen.
I love it. Yeah. So big fan of Svengoolie. Also, he doesn't, other than the makeup and like the kind of the jokes in the vaudeville, he doesn't have like a spooky voice. He's just like telling you facts while in makeup. It's endlessly charming. I love him so much. There's also, it would not be the Happy Harvest Horror Show if I did not mention Shudder at least once.
Yeah, truly.
So here
we go. Why aren't they paying us?
I don't know. They probably have a good reason, but they haven't told me.
They haven't. Everyone needs to contact Shudder and tell them to start paying us.
We're going to get an email from Shudder and going, who are you? Why? And a couple years ago, in 2018, Shudder brought back. Let's rewind. I'll get to the Shudder. Let's
rewind
talk about Joe
it.
Bob. All right.
That was my rewind sound.
Let's talk about Joe Bob. Because he's another current. I would say of the current horror hosts, he's probably maybe one of the thanks to Shudder. He's one of the most recognized. Is currently still doing it. He was a Dallas reporter. He would review movies under the pseudonym the persona Joe Bob Briggs, and his whole character was like a redneck Texan that really loved drive-in movies, like cult classic movies,
super cute.
Yeah, and so in the Movie Channel had a show called Joe Bob's Drive-In Theater, where he did just that. He would introduce, drive-in B movies and talk about them, and under this whole redneck persona. It went on for a number of years until that was canceled. But then 4 months later, he went, and this is like 1996. He joined Monster Vision, like I told you. I saw as a kid, I would watch Joe Bob on Monster Vision, this, redneck comic talking about, science fiction late night movies. And I'm like, what is this world?
What is happening?
What is happening? That lasted only for a few years because by the year 2000, the horror host, TNT was largely completely uninterested in horror at that point. They were like, all right, no more. So he got canceled. He was gone. Fast forward 18 years later, back to Shudder. Shudder did it was called The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs, where it was a 23-hour straight marathon of bringing him back, and he would introduce and he would have totals of like, in this movie you can have all these crazy things will happen. He gives a little review and he talks about it and it goes in, and instead of commercial breaks he'll just interject at certain times in the movie and kind of give his opinion, and like make a joke or something and then get back into the movie. Anyway, that was so successful. Shudder then made it into a show where in every episode you get like 2 movies instead of a 23-hour marathon. It's now more palatable, 2 movies an episode. So and I bring that all up to say, in the quarantine, this was such a tonic of like every Friday having a destination where people could all tune in and like feel connected at this thing of like watching nutso movies. It was great. And so love that that's still going, and they got it was kind of scary. It was kind of scary at the end of this. It was just like a month ago, the end of the last episode. They still hadn't been renewed, and so there was this like question of like, is it done? Is the dream over? They got renewed. It's okay.
Is the dream over?
You can go back and watch them. All the episodes are there on Shudder TV.
Shudder.
This is a non-paid ad. So yeah, that is a modern day horror host that is still going, along with Svengoolie, along with Elvira, still doing tours. She doesn't have a show anymore, but
she's around. She's doing
around.
Stuff.
She's pretty cool.
Another one I found, and this was an 80s era. And I found a lot of just videos on YouTube that were like compilations. And this one was based out of Kansas City. And it was Crematia Mortem. And she was the host of a show called Creature Features on like Kansas City public television in the 80s. Very much Elvira, like 81 to 88. So the same time frame. And I was like, I just stumbled on it in researching on YouTube, and I was like transfixed. I was like, wow, like this is the first episode like video I saw. She comes out and like the whole set is very much the campy Halloween horror. She has that look, right? That like kind of spooky black hair, like kind of vibe. And she's talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. Because
that speaks to me.
I know it does.
I was born in Kansas City, so
I know you have ties to Kansas City. So I was like, wow. And she like goes on this whole thing about like the Chiefs game that was just playing before her horror show. And I was like, this
so much.
This
I love it.
Is saying a lot. Like this is like there's a lot going on here, and I was very excited by it. But yeah, super campy, super silly, lots of puns. There was another video of her where she did like silly horoscopes. She did like the horoscope for everyone, and they were all like kind of creepy and silly. And I was like, God, this is wonderful. Like this is prime public access television. Like,
yeah, totally.
Like so good. 80s, man. Public television, public access television in the 80s is a gold mine. Like
100%.
Yeah. But so that was, I mean, and that was just one I found. Like we've kind of been talking about, like there are a lot. Like it was a common thing for a while, for like you said, for like these public access stations to literally pull the weatherman and for him to like do like a horror segment, which is crazy. Like like so wild that was a thing.
It's so funny because maybe a lot of those weathermen really did hate the horror movies, and so they were genuinely making fun of him. But jokes on them, they kept him alive by doing it. You know,
right?
yeah. So I mean, there's so many, and I'm sorry if your local horror host did not make our talk list today. Let us know though. Hit us up and
if you have a horror host that like means a lot to you, would love to hear about it because
there's so
and doing this research, I was really both shocked and excited by how ubiquitous of a thing this is at large. The horror host concept just really took hold for several decades.
And in some way, I mean, it's not always horror. It's more cult B movies, but Mystery Science Theater 3000 is a bit of a knockoff of this too. Knockoff. It's a branch of the same kind of concept.
Yeah, part of this world for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally agree.
I guess with some other branching ones, we have Christine McConnell. She had a Netflix show that was I thought really charming and fun. She would do arts and crafts and baking with like really spooky creations. And it only got one season. Netflix was,
What's the name of it?
The show was called The Curious Creations of Christine McConnell. And she, I bring this one up because she's not, a host in introducing movies, but she is very much a personality. She's very, she looks like a Stepford Wives, mom, but she's making like really spooky creations and there's puppets. It's almost like a spooky Mr. Rogers in a way, like the show.
I love that.
I loved it. And I wish the show got, more love because we were a big fan of it. But if you want like a fun, spooky arts and crafts show, check out this show on Netflix, or just look at her web show because she's still going. She's just kind of like an expert in so many different things, upholstery and like crafts and like so many different ways. But that's like another like variation of like the spooky host personality, I think.
I think so. That's kind of like, and that's honestly where I wanted to, I guess, kind of, finish up this conversation is like in thinking about the contemporary development of this. Like I did find in my research, I found some like internet horror hosts that seem to be doing the thing, like seem to be like stepping into that same campy, silly, like we're talking about a horror movie kind of vibe with the set that's all spooky and I found a couple of them. One was Blair Bathory, who does a series called Fear House, and I Googled her and I found her Instagram and stuff. Like she does a lot of just spooky culture stuff for sure. But the only place I could actually find the show was on Facebook. I don't know if it exists other places, but I was able to find it on Facebook. And she does like spooky film too, like short films. But on Facebook, she does a series that is very much the classic horror host kind of vibe.
Sure.
Like, yeah, it's campy and it's kind of like silly and awkward at times, but like in the exact same way that like Elvira is, so like I feel like it's very intentional, and so she's clearly trying to keep that alive, and she has a pretty solid following. And I found this really random one that was definitely doing the same thing on YouTube. This creator Sally the Zombie Cheerleader, just doing YouTube. That. I know, right? Like I was like, fuck, I love the internet. I watched one of her videos and it was very much the horror host vibe.
Yeah.
That same thing. And I was like, those are the two I was able to find that I felt still really fit in that lineage and a very clear, like, we are using this template.
Yeah.
However, I could be wrong. Like I said, this isn't like necessarily my wheelhouse. So if you're more of a horror host person and you have information, please let us know. But I couldn't really find much in terms of contemporary. there's obviously tons of creators out there who are doing spooky things and are doing things related to horror. Like that list is never ending. But I couldn't find a lot in the internet space that was really mimicking the horror host style.
I think nowadays the Joe Bob Last Drive-In on Shudder is maybe the premier best, maybe last example of that. I do think I think we're seeing maybe the starts of a different, like, it's not explicitly host of, packaged up horror movies and introducing them. But I mean, we have new mediums now of live entertainment, right? So like, Twitch.tv, it's live playing not just video games, but also in real life content. You can check us out, Happy Harvest, Twitch.tv, or on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But
it's super fun, you guys. I show up for a lot of them, and they're I don't even like video games, and I have fun. So,
but I mean, it's what we're kind of talking about, right? It's a personality that's there commentating on what is happening in the game. And I know, like, in the horror game space, it's really big on Twitch, because it's fun to watch them react and get scared and whatnot. But there's also especially in the game Dead by Daylight, which is kind of like a multiplayer game that's so popular, and it's kind of like a greatest hits of horror franchises in this game of like hide and seek. It's really fun. But in the drag community, it's very big, where people will dress up in drag and stream and play, I've watched a number of them, and it's like, wow, this is something new. It's like in a way that I'm sure kids sitting around the TV in the late 50s maybe are going, who is this and what are these movies? Yeah. I'm now seeing a full drag persona, personality commentating and playing and screaming and watching like this horror game that's happening behind them.
And that makes perfect sense. Like that ties in perfectly, because like the drag community is 100% responsible for camp, right? Mm-hmm. Like the drag community created camp. They are who deserve all the credit for camp, like literally. And campy horror is such a thing. So it makes sense that all of these are connected.
Yeah. And it's exciting. It's exciting that it's happening in new different ways.
Totally. And so, yeah, I guess I have like, a handful of little like big questions about just this whole concept. Right. Like connect, like dealing with that. Like, one, why were horror hosts such a big thing in like the mid 20th century?
Yeah.
And why have they kind of faded out? But then also, what does the contemporary horror host look like? Like, because I feel like you're totally right. We have all these new avenues. Like, to some degree, I think what we're doing can be a version of the contemporary horror host, right? It's different.
Sure. Yeah.
But like, it's
less theatrical,
Yeah. But like, it's still kind of having these conversations about like it's a different version of it, but like I could see it, I could potentially make a connection to the lineage, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm intrigued by this idea that for decades there was this clear template of what a horror host was. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And now
it's just kind of
branching off into a lot
we're in all these other spaces, and there are these cool people, like I mentioned, like Blair Bathory and Sally the Zombie Cheerleader, that are keeping that horror host template alive. And I think that's wonderful. Like, I think someone should be doing that. Like, I think that's great. Yeah. And I'm glad that people are, but now we're in a space of just with the internet, so many more avenues. That it doesn't feel like that doesn't really exist even in, I mean, I don't have cable TV anymore, but like I know for a fact that people with cable TV aren't like sitting around and watching horror hosts.
No, because largely that example probably does not exist anymore.
Exactly. And so that there's a question about like how it was so mainstream, and now it's in the internet age moved into niche communities, and what is the contemporary horror host? And then additionally, my last question was, this is a big one, has the horror host been overtaken by the true crime craze?
Well, I think that was kind of already happening in the 80s, right? With we had like Unsolved Mysteries.
Fuck, I love Unsolved Mysteries.
You know, you had what was the other one? Mysteries. Fact or Fiction. I can't remember what the Truth or Fiction. I can't remember, but if I'm I'm definitely getting the name wrong. But they're the sort of, you know, we're gonna bring you spooky true crime, you know, stories, and that was kind of taken over. Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know why it died out. I think it's finally coming back in a way. I think in a lot for the late 90s, early 2000s, horror was just having a bummer time. You know, it was slowly fading out. 1,000 reasons you can look up. And then 9/11 happened in 2001. And then we had, you know, the reaction of it, the torture porn, you know, craze and horror. Yeah. I think it probably just had a sour
honestly,
note.
that whole craze really turned me off for a long time.
Probably turned a lot of people off.
Yeah, because I was such a fucking spooky kid. Like, I loved in the 90s, I loved horror. I loved spooky shit. I loved the 90s horror stuff. And I really, in the early 2000s, when we shifted into, the torture porn, I was like, I don't like this. Like, fuck this. Like, and I stepped completely away from it because I really did not enjoy it.
Sure.
And that's also why I think I have such a deep love for A24, because I think it brought me back. Like, I think it brought me back, and I was like, okay, I do love this stuff. Like,
yeah, that's real.
But like, no, that was from I did not care for the direction of horror in circa 2005 to 2015. Like, I don't, I think that's maybe, you know, I don't know the exact, it was probably a lot of different factors that played into it, but I think maybe this is one of them, that if for a while it was taboo maybe to like it, you know, even though it was huge and was mainstream, it made a lot of money, you know, we talk about. Yeah, totally.
All those Saw movies made gangbusters, you know, so, and I went and saw them all. So,
I sent you that tweet the other day. Jigsaw wouldn't scare me either, because I'll just die. That's fine. I'm not doing your little pranks.
I'm not doing your little pranks.
And I was like, yeah, like,
get
fuck that
here.
guy.
Get out of here. I think more than anything, it just evolved, right? I think we just needed a little time away from it to see it evolve, right? That I think we're talking now with Twitch, that's now its own avenue. We're getting the actual literal version of it with like The Last Drive-In on Shudder, like that. It was what it was, and now it's a premiere version of that. We're also getting it in podcast, I think, with like,
yes,
you know, introducing spooky things. Very popular, you know, Lore is a very popular one, but he's not. I mean, he's a personality. Aaron Mahnke's, you know, he's the character.
I'm Aaron Mahnke.
That's the one. That's the one. Great. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. I love you, Aaron Mahnke. Like, no disrespect.
Lore's huge. Love it.
I know. Lore's fantastic.
But other one, you know, there's other ones that like No Sleep Podcast, which I'm a fan of, which they have write in, you know, original stories, and they read them, and they like reenact them on like little radio plays, and they're really fun. But like even the ads at the beginning, they turn it into like a scary ad that they're like, I
love that.
You know, like, oh my gosh, the killer's right outside. What do we do? Like, well, you can eat some 5 gum or something like, you know, like. There's like things like that I really appreciate, that echoes what we're talking about, you know, that like has a fun tongue-in-cheek energy along with it.
I guess that's where this question really even comes from, though, is like, I think we're all aware that the true crime craze is at the top, right? The true crime podcast, but also, and I think the connection for me is because we're talking about these horror hosts as being like on television, right? That like people can like, you know, gather around the TV and watch. And true crime is all over TV, like Dateline, like, you know, like, like primetime television there's a lot. It's like all true crime. Like there's a lot of true crime.
Yeah.
And so that's also where I see that connection. Like just in the setting of imagining in the 1950s, a family watching Vampira introduce this horror movie. I think now families sit around and watch Dateline or,
Yeah.
you know,
Sure.
and so I'm like, has that weirdly,
Is it connected? Is it of the same?
yeah,
DNA?
exactly. Is it connected?
Well,
Maybe it's not. Maybe, you know,
It's a good
like
question. Are they separate things, but are they sharing? They kind of going to do the same thing. I mean, at that point, like we said, are we horror hosts? Are we?
Yeah.
Is that,
like, what are we? What are we
am
doing?
I? Now, existential end of this episode. Wait, who am I though?
Who am I? Am I a horror host in 2021? Is that what's happening here?
Am I?
Am
I
me feel
Vampira's
like I need to fucking
son?
Yeah, exactly. It makes me feel like I need to dye my hair black and like put on a corset and like really like push my boobs up. But like, but like maybe that'd be fun for an episode. Like maybe I should dress up as Elvira for an episode.
Maybe.
And yeah, and I guess that's also part of it too, because the horror host from the 1950s all the way through the 1980s and even, you know, into like the 90s and stuff, part of it was this very like creating this very like spooky, campy set, right?
Mhm.
And like, and we talk about this, like I'm surrounded by plants and I'm just like living in my house, but like I want to talk about these things, right? So it's like there's, in the content, at least we're making, there's this kind of transition to the way that it's being presented or to the variations in the way that's being presented. Because like I said, there are people out there that I think are really emulating the classic horror host. And I think that's great. I think that's a wonderful thing. And then I think there are lots of different people that are kind of taking different approaches to examining horror and expressing their enjoyment and love for horror in a fun way. So it's like, yeah. So it's like, I guess ultimately it's just like, it seems to me that there was a very clear template for what a horror host was. And a horror host was there to create an entire environment of like spooky energy and like in a fun, campy, kind of silly way, show a horror film and like share that.
Yeah.
And now we're moving into a space because of the internet, because of Twitch, because of all of these different avenues where you have people expressing their love for horror in a lot of different ways.
That there's no template anymore.
Exactly. There's no template.
I think that's the
anymore.
answer to your question, is that the template is kind of thrown out the window. And that's...
Yeah. Totally. But even though the template's thrown out the window, it's still part of the lineage, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
There's still a knowledge that what came before. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I'm trying to say? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Listeners, if you know what we're trying to say, just you can write us in at happyharvesthorrorshow@gmail.com.
Yeah, I feel like this episode ended up being
really self-reflective.
Yeah, self-reflective, introspective, self-aware. In terms of like what is a horror host, and do we fall into this lineage? But would love to hear any of your thoughts, and would definitely love to hear if you have like a favorite horror host. We would love to hear about them because they're all such characters.
And we love them.
Yeah, we love them. happyharvesthorrorshow@gmail.com. Like I said, I stand Crypt Keeper, and also Bill Hader as Vincent Price. That's like my
that's real.
That's like, that's the energy. That's the energy I want in my life. Is like not even Vincent Price, Bill Hader as Vincent Price. Is like that.
Which I think Vincent Price was a host for a minute.
Yeah. He did shit. He did like horror hosting.
Vincent Price did a few things.
Yeah.
In the spooky field. Yeah.
He did a lot. We'll do a Vincent Price episode 100%. There's no way. Like we can't not talk about it. I have things to say about Vincent Price. I have feelings.
Uh-oh. Well, stay tuned.
But thank you for listening to our episode about horror hosts. This is a really fun topic, and we'd just like to know your thoughts on the nature of horror and expressing love for horror and in the relationship between horror and camp. I think that is huge. And fun conversation. Thank you for being here. We really love you all.
Yeah. Hope to see you next time. We're going into this spooky season. It's basically Halloween, everybody.
It's happening. We're like gearing, like I feel it. Like I
Halloween.
literally was in the bathtub today and like a chill breeze came in through the window and I was like, hello, autumn. Like,
Hello, Autumn.
it was like a moment of like, it's coming.
You are welcome here. Come into my home.
So we're gearing up for some big spooky season content, and we love you. We're happy you're here, and we'll catch y'all next time.
Bye.